My name is Jordan Bloyd, and I'm here with Christian County Library doing an interview virtually with author Amy Engel. Amy, thank you so much for being here with us. You've published 3 books in the past, and we are here to talk about your 4th book, The Familiar Dark. I just finished it. It's super great. I enjoyed it a lot. So let's jump right into it. For our viewers who haven't had a chance to read The Familiar Dark, can you give us an overview of what it's about, the characters, and so forth?
Sure. First of all, let me just say thank you so much for having me. I know this is kind of a weird format with the pandemic, but I'm thrilled to be here. The Familiar Dark is psychological suspense, I guess would probably be how it's categorized, but it's set in the Missouri Ozarks, and it's not really a spoiler to say that it opens with a murder or 2 murders of 2 preteen girls. And then the story follows the mother of one of the girls as she sort of tries to unravel why her daughter died and who killed her. So the main character is named Eve, and she's sort of the driving force of the book.
Yeah, I really liked Eve a lot, even though she's not a traditionally likable mother, that she was a really interesting character. So for our viewers who haven't read the book yet, again, librarians do a lot of what we call reader's advisory. We like to try to help people find other books that they would like to read, movies they would like to watch, that kind of thing. So what are some good comparison titles of books or movies or TV shows that if someone liked those, they would probably like The Familiar Dark?
Well, probably most obviously like the TV show Ozark on Netflix. I've only watched part of the first season, but I've had a lot of people say that the book gives them those dark Ozark vibes, obviously, because that's where it's set. As far as books, I think The Weight of Blood by Laura McHugh, Winter's Bone by Daniel Woodrell, and then branching out from the Ozark theme, the book deals a lot with mothers and daughters and their relationships. So I think people who like that type of book, Reconstructing Amelia by Kimberly McCreet, it's a book about a mother who's trying to sort of figure out what happened to her daughter. And then Bastard Out of Carolina, which is an older, not older, but more than a decade old book by Dorothy Allison, which deals with sort of complicated family relationships and mother-daughter relationships. Those are probably the ones that spring to mind most immediately for me.
That's great. I really like those comparisons. I mean, this is a rural noir book, which is just the name of that genre I really like. I think it's fun.
Yeah.
But it definitely is. It's a noir book. And Eve, the protagonist, is a noir-style hero. In some cases, kind of an anti-hero. She's cynical, she's brave, she's tough, and it seems like she's always in just over her head. Until recently, though, we didn't have a lot of women noir-style heroes. How would you compare Eve to other sort of noir detectives?
Well, I'd start out by saying, I don't know why this is about me, but I tend to write main characters who lots of people describe as not immediately likable, which is funny to me because when I'm writing them, I love them. I just adore them. And then I'm always a little surprised when people say, oh, well, it's amazing. They're not that likable, but I still found myself rooting for them, which is, I guess, good. That's how I want it. I'd rather that than people say, I hated them the whole way through, but that just jumps out at me. That doesn't really answer your question, though. Yeah, I think the thing about Eve as a noir detective, although she probably wouldn't call herself a detective, that stands out the most beyond her being female, like you mentioned, is the fact that she's a mother. And I think that sort of sets her apart from most other noir detectives. I just think that being a mother and having her maternal instinct being the driving force behind her search for answers is probably what sets her apart and makes her a very unusual type of noir character. And so that was really important for me in the book, to explore that and make that a focus.
I like that you liked Eve. I like that you liked Eve and are sort of surprised by, because she's got such a shell on her,
Right.
you know, it's really, you can see, fortunately through the book, the way that you write her, we get, of course, like her psychology and what she's feeling and what she's thinking. But even she knows she's not presenting as, you know, sort of a saccharine or even, you know, thoughtful middle-class mother. She is an amazing mother. She's incredibly dedicated. You can see how she was able to turn her life around. And we get all of those glimpses. But when you first meet her, and even some of the choices you make, so you're like, oh, Eve.
Yeah, she does make some dubious choices.
Yeah.
But I think for me as a writer, and hopefully for people reading the book, I'm able to look beyond a character's sort of unlikability or bad choices, as long as those choices make sense for that character. And so, you know, everything she does makes sense given what we know about Eve. And so I just tried to be true to that as I was writing. And I think hopefully that makes her more accessible for the reader. Even if they would never make those same choices, they can at least think, oh, I can see why Eve would make those choices. And so that's what I was driving towards.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. And Eve is the mother of Junie, who, as you mentioned, is one of the girls who's murdered early in the book. And she's really this absent heart of the story, because her life and her death motivate so many of the characters. And I thought it was interesting. We have lots of people sharing their memories about Junie, and she seems like a wonderful kid. But we never see Junie speak for herself. There are no sort of flashbacks of her. And so I'm wondering, how did you decide to present Junie in the book?
You know, it's interesting you asked that, because in my initial draft, I had chapters from Junie's point of view before she died. And I was never 100% sure about them. And when my agent read the book, she said, I don't think you need these. I would take them out. And I think keeping the focus tight on Eve sort of propels the narrative ahead in a way that we liked. But also a big part of the book is about sort of the secretive lives of teenage girls, or the ways that we don't always know everything about our own children, even if they're the people we're closest to in the world. And I just thought, you know, keeping Junie as more of a mystery for the reader sort of reinforced that idea that Eve thought she knew everything about her daughter, really didn't. And so when we read it both ways, and it just worked better without those chapters from Junie's point of view. But it's interesting you picked up on that absence. So yeah,
she seems like a compelling character in her own right, but I liked that you only got different characters' perspectives of her. I liked that choice, but I did think it was really interesting. Well, let's talk about another choice, the title of the book, The Familiar Dark. Where does that come from, and what does it refer to?
I was struggling over a title for the book. I'd finished the book and I was trying all these different titles and nothing was working. And so sometimes when I'm stuck, I will look at, you know, song lyrics or poems, just anything that might spark an idea. And my daughter actually found the Emily Dickinson poem that it's excerpted in the beginning of the book. And it says, "We grow accustomed to the dark when light is put away." And so I was like, oh, that's a great quote, sort of encapsulates the book, you know, because Junie was Eve's light. And when she's gone, she sort of reverts back to the way she grew up. But it was too long and wordy for a title. So I just started thinking, you know, accustomed to the dark, familiar with the dark, and it rolled from there. So I owe it all to Emily Dickinson, I guess.
I bet a number of people could say that about titles. Her succinct writing.
Yes, exactly.
So fantastic. It really lends itself to these kind of punchy
yes.
titles that really suck you in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I also really like on the cover of the book, and I don't know how well people can see this, but this is a picture of the Missouri Ozarks, isn't it? From above? Yes. I thought I read that. I thought that was really cool. And the setting is so important for understanding what's taking place in the familiar dark. So I'm curious about, the role of landscape, the role of place in the book.
About the cover really quickly, when they did the initial cover, it was the snow and a forest, but it was the Alps. And I was like, this is really pretty, but doesn't look anything like the Ozarks. So I was like, you need to find, so they actually contacted a drone company that does
Wow.
over the Ozarks and found a picture and got it from them. So I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. Setting is very important to me. Like after character, that's probably the first thing I settle on. And I always struggle a little bit because I'm from the Midwest and I like to set my stories in the Midwest, but they're very dark stories with characters who are often doing terrible things, and they don't always paint the people or the setting in the greatest light. And so I struggle a little bit with that because my book before this, The Roanoke Girls, was small town Kansas, and it made it seem the town it was set in was not nice. And same with this book, a lot of it's very dark and unflattering. I feel like the Midwest is underrepresented in crime fiction. So it sort of just goes with the territory. They're going to be dark and kind of ugly books sometimes, but it's really important to me to set them in this part of the world. And as for this book, I knew pretty early on I wanted to set it in the Ozarks. I sort of had the bare outline of a story in my head and the characters, and I was just thinking about landscape and just the secrets and different things. And I in my head, I thought of different places, and the Ozarks, I don't know, just the whole feel of the Ozarks, the way it looks, everything just worked with the story. And so I never really considered another spot.
Interesting. And I really like the name of the town that they live in, Barren Springs. It's kind of funny. It's a contradiction in terms, and I feel like it immediately gives you a sense of what that place is going to be like. So did you model it on a specific town or place in the Ozarks, or is this sort of totally made up?
Totally made up. I didn't model it on any particular spot. And the name, I went back and forth with a bunch of different names, and finally settled on Barren Springs. And there's a short part in the book that sort of explains how the town got the name. But yeah, no, it's not based on any one particular spot in the Ozarks. It's just sort of a mishmash of different places I've seen, and
So I'm actually from this area. I'm an Ozarks native. I grew up in Branson, and I felt like you did a great job with conveying these sort of complex family hierarchies and these networks in this part of the country. So how did you sort of conceptualize those relationships and how those relationships were going to work? Because they are simple, and I think going along with the theme, a lot of them are fairly dark themselves.
Yeah. Well, my mom grew up in a really small town in Kansas, and I've always lived in cities, but my great-grandparents lived there until they died when I was in college, so we spent a lot of time there. And just sort of being an introvert, I was always observing the way that our family interacted, other families in small town. The families are very protective of each other, but also the town, sort of everyone knows everyone's business and what's going on. And so I definitely put that in my novels. But in this book, I wanted it to be, Eve and her brother have a very strong relationship, but I definitely wanted to focus in on the maternal line, the mother to daughter through the generations relationship, and the different ways that mothers raise their daughters and things like that. So I thought back a lot. I mean, no one in my family has a relationship like Eve and her mom, thankfully. But I definitely wanted to play into those relationships that I've seen and observed. So.
Yeah, it was great. And you're talking about mothers and daughters, and there are all of the mother-daughter relationships in the book are different. They show you a different facet of what that relationship can look like. So can you kind of talk about, there's this theme of how far mothers will go to protect their daughters and different mothers doing different things. Can you talk about how you presented that in the book?
Yeah, I think there's definitely more conventional mother-daughter relationships. Probably like Jenny and Izzy is more of a conventional relationship, and then Eve and Junie, Eve being a single mom and Junie's her only child, and it's a closer probably relationship than Jenny and her daughter. And then there's Eve and her mom, who had a extremely dysfunctional relationship, not healthy probably in any way. But I would argue that Eve's mom thinks that she is a good mom. She thinks she's doing the best she can for her daughter, giving her the skills that she needs to make it in the world. And so I wanted to look at that in the different ways that mothers help their daughters, damage their daughters, and that sometimes something that is damaging is also in a weird way a gift. There's just all these different facets of the mother-daughter relationship, and to me, it's one of the most complex relationships that there is. Whether you love your mother or you hate your mother influences your life. And so I definitely wanted to dive into that in a bunch of different directions.
I thought it was very compelling. I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. So this is like, a mystery at heart. It is kind of a whodunit. And I know that every author has their own way of sort of plotting and characterization. So I'm wondering, because I'm not a writer, do you start at the end? Do you kind of know who did it and then you work backward, or does it develop in some different way? I don't outline at all. So I generally know how the book will start, and I have an idea of how it's going to end. So I generally know who did it, but I tend to sort of leave it open because I don't outline. And so if something changes or shifts, I can adjust to that. And my books, they are mysteries, but I'd say they're more character driven than they are plot driven. And so, I'm always sort of going with the characters and seeing where the book leads me. And generally, the person who I thought did it will be the one who did it, but I'm not 100% set in stone until I get there. I get that. So this is your 4th published book, and it's your 2nd book for adults, which is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes. So can you give us an overview of your other published work, and can you talk about how writing for young adults, for teens, is different than your last 2 books in writing for adults?
Yeah, my first 2 books were young adult, The Book of Ivy, and then the follow-up, The Revolution of Ivy, and those are dystopian young adult novels. And then The Roanoke Girls, my first adult novel, is another dark psychological suspense set in small-town Kansas. I think the main difference for me, my process is the same whether I'm writing for young adult or adult. I think I feel more of a responsibility to the reader when I'm writing young adult, just to make sure that I portray characters in a certain way. I don't like young adult books where, the boy has all the glory, or the boy can be mean to the girl and she still loves him. Like I try to sort of weave in ideas that I don't necessarily feel the same responsibility to put in adult books. And then adult books, I'm freer to go a lot darker, and to sort of trust the reader to be able to handle whatever it is that and I'm not disparaging young adult readers. A lot of them are so mature and can read anything, but I just feel like there's a little bit more of a sense of the reader as I'm writing when I'm writing young adult.
So you've mentioned that you are a parent, and so could you tell us about your life, before you became a writer, or if you were always a writer, what you've done, prior to, in addition to writing books with your life?
Yeah. Before I was a writer, I was a criminal defense attorney. And I did that for 10 years. And then when my oldest child was starting kindergarten, I decided to stay at home. And I told my husband, I was always writing something my whole life. And I said, I want to try to be a writer. And I said, now that I'm home with the kids, I'll have more time. Ha ha ha. And I'm going to write a book and see if I can get published. And he said, okay, well, how long are we talking? Like, if it doesn't happen, how long till you go back to the law? And I said, give me a decade. And he was like, a decade? And I was like, that seems, I know it took Sue Grafton like 7 or 10 years to get published. I was like, that seems reasonable. And so, he agreed. And the first couple of years, I didn't write anything. And then I started writing. And I think Ivy came out, it was about 7 or 8 years after. 7 years. So I got in under the 10-year deadline. And so now I just write full time.
That's amazing. I think a lot of people want to be able to do that and aren't able, and it's really fantastic. So do you have any then like unpublished books, unpublished stories? And when you published your first book, did that change your writing process?
I do have a couple. I wrote a book before Ivy that has never seen the light of day. And then I actually wrote a book between Roanoke Girls and The Familiar Dark. And I didn't like it. And my agent didn't like it. And so that one got tried like an upper middle class couple. And I just wasn't that interested in them, which always shows up on the page. So that one will never probably see the light of day either. My process has changed mainly in my own head. I feel like there's more pressure when you write. Like when you first start out, you're only writing for yourself. You honestly don't know, will anyone ever read this? Maybe, maybe not. And so you just write. And now I feel more like, sometimes, what are the readers going to expect for the next book? Is this one too dark? Is it not dark enough? Is it too similar to this book? Is it too weak? You just get inside your own head a little more, I think. But on the flip side, I trust myself more. I know that I can have writer's block or hit a roadblock, and eventually I will get around it and the book will get finished, and I'll be able to get to the end. And so that sort of confidence that comes with time is definitely something I appreciate now that I have a few books under my belt.
I totally get that. So not to sound too demanding, because of course The Familiar Dark was just published this year, but are you already working on another book?
I am working on another book. It's, I feel a little guilty because I felt like during the pandemic, stuck at home most of the time, I should have another book done by now. But I've found, and I've talked to other writers, it's a little hard to concentrate right now, just with everything going on in the world. But I think now that this is our new normal, I'm slowly getting back into a rhythm. And so I am working on a new book. I hope to have a first draft done here pretty soon.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you have other writer friends. Do you all act as a support group to each other? Do you bounce ideas off each other? How does that work?
There's several writers on Instagram that we try to support each other when a book comes out, or, you have an interview or something. Laura McHugh, who lives in Columbia, Missouri, she's probably my closest writer friend. And we often email like, I hate this book I'm writing, or will you read this chapter and tell me whether it's horrible? And so I lean on her a lot. And just to give her a little plug, she has a new book coming out, in 2021, and I got to read it, and it's amazing. So
I'm looking forward to it. She's a great writer. The Weight of Blood, and then what was her follow-up?
There was Arrowwood, and then The Wolf Once In.
Okay, I haven't read The Wolf Once In, but Arrowwood, that one really got to me.
Her new one's called What's Done in Darkness, and it's really good.
That's a good title too.
Yeah.
That's great. So we're already sort of talking about things that you are reading. Of course, we're a library. We're interested not just in what you're writing, but what you're reading. So what else are you reading? And I guess our last question will be, do you have a favorite book that you think everyone should read?
Oh gosh. Okay. Right now, I just finished The Only Plane in the Sky, which is an oral history of 9/11, which was amazing. It was so good. And now I'm reading Atomic Love. It's brand new. It's by, I want to say like Jenny Fields. It's about a woman in the 1950s who worked on, a scientist who worked on making the bombs, but it's also like a love story. It kind of reminds me of maybe like The Nightingale or something like that by Kristen Hanna. So it's really good so far. I just started it. Favorite book. My favorite book of all time is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. That's probably my number one. And then for runners up, I would say The Stand by Stephen King and Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. Like those three books are probably my all-time favorites, but I love to read. I always have to have a book. I usually have a huge stack from the library. So yeah, I feel just out of sorts if I don't have a good book that I'm reading and a backup stack. So yeah, I love libraries and librarians, and you guys are amazing. So thank you for everything you do for reading.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What a lovely way to end that. But I was going to say, we know exactly how you feel. We always need a stack of books. We love talking about books, sharing what we're reading. It's really fantastic. Well, Amy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your book. I really recommend it to any of those readers who do like rural noir, who like mysteries, who like strong female leads who are still complex and interesting. And if you're just interested in stories about Missouri Ozarks, it's a really great addition to that sort of canon. So it's a great book, and it's been so lovely to talk to you, Amy. Thank you very much.
Amy, I really appreciate it.